Okay, so this presentation is going to focus on the calculation of one of the highest improbability of code 19. So if you've ever had to explain to someone, Brother Husab, please mute your mic. If you ever had to explain to someone, hey, this is really improbable, for example, 19 letters in the Basmala, the very first verse, or the fact that there's multiples of 19 in the very first revelation, or the chapters are a multiple of 19, and the huruf muqata'at, or the disjointed letters, are a multiple of 19. Now, all of these are extremely improbable, but it doesn't sing as powerful as this one. And people, when they see it the first time, they don't just quite register how improbable it is. So this presentation is going to go through that explanation, God willing, but also trying to explain the math. So if someone ever asks the question, they can go through this presentation. God willing, this is going to be posted on the YouTube or something, and they can see it firsthand, right? Just going to test the screen that I can doodle on this. Yep, it's doodling all right. And let me go to the next slide. I'll just reset this. Yeah, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so in the Quran, there are 6,346 total verses, right? This is including 112 unnumbered basmala and 2 numbered basmala. So here you have 1, 1, 2, what they call unnumbered bismillah, plus 2 numbered bismillah, which is the very first verse, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's considered a numbered verse. That's verse 1 of the Quran, 1, 1, right? And then you have 2730, which is the second numbered Bismillah. That's when, I think it's David sending the letter to Sheba saying, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, repeating this multiple of 19. Now, out of all the verses in the Quran, 6,346 total, in this number, this includes this 114. There are 1,919 verses that contain one or more words from verse 1-1. So if you look at the very first verse, it's Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which contains 4 words: Bism, Allah, Rahman, Rahim. Now, if you haven't gone through the patterns, this root, Ism, or in the name, appears in the Quran 19 times. This root, Allah, appears 2,698 times. This root, Rahman, 57 times. They call this the nominal root. So you're not looking for a quality of someone who's gracious. It's the most gracious, right? It's the nominal quality. And then you have Rahim, which appears 114 times. This is all a multiple of 19. This is 19 times 6. This is times 3. This is times 142. And this is exactly 19. So, the pattern was discovered by Rashad, obviously, through computer analysis, and this probability is extremely small. Just what I presented there with the different roots is already pretty small, right? But not as small as this appearance, and we're going to prove that mathematically, God willing. So let's go to the next one. Have I moved too far? 1, 2, 3. Why did I skip that? There we go. So this is obviously the first verse, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. The verse is obviously in 1-1. This contains exactly 19 letters. If you want to go back, we can prove that. 1, this is Ba, Sin, Mim, that's 3. Alif, Lam, Lam, Ha, that's 4. Alif, Lam, Ra, Ha, Mim, Nun, that's 6. Alif, Lam, Ra, Ha, Ya, Mim, that's also 6, right? 6, 12, 16, plus the 3, that's 19. And then it appears 114 times in the Quran, which is what I explained earlier. 112 unnumbered, 2 that are numbered. And this is missing from chapter 9. Chapter 9 is the only surah that doesn't have Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. unnumbered, but it appears 19 chapters later, right? If you include chapter 9, you go from 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 to 27. This is 19 chapters. And in chapter 27, this is 27:30, it reads, "In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful," which is what we're saying. So now we get to the nitty-gritty. So this 1919 miracle, I'll explain the logic, right? A verse is counted if it contains any of these words. So for example, the first verse is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Obviously, it contains every single one. Therefore, it's counted. The next word, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, right? Allah appears there. And then the next verse, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Rahman and Rahim appears. So that counts as three instances already. And then it's Maliki Yawmiddin. Maliki Yawmiddin doesn't have any of these words, so they're not counted. So the verse needs only one of these words to be counted. Like I said, 1:1 contains every single one. 1:2 contains Allah. 1:3 contains Rahman and Rahim. And 1:4 doesn't contain any of them. So that's 3 out of the 4 we've counted thus far. And the technique is very simple. You go from verse 1:1. I don't know why I did 1 like that for this one. And we go all the way. We keep counting every instance of any one of these. If all 4 appear, it still counts as 1. If only 1 appear, it only counts as 1. Until we get to verse 6, 3, 4, 6. That's the end of the Quran. And some verse may contain multiple basmala words, as I mentioned before. So now we're going straight into the math, right? So this is the probability calculation. So on here, you've got the probability of a single word slot. I'll explain what that slot means. So in the Quran, there's roughly 80,000 possible words. For every single word, if you look through the Quran, you'll get about 80,000. It's around 77,000, but I'm just rounding up. And in the Arabic language today, there's many more words. It's like 240,000 or so. Now we want 4 out of these words, right? Meaning, if I had to pick a word at random, let's say this is a slot, and I want to insert, a word here, God, for example, or another word here, trust, for example, right? Any given word that I might choose has a probability of appearance. And the probability for every word, given 80,000 unique words, is 1 in 80,000. This is logical, because for me to get exactly this word, I have to compete with 79,999 other words. It could be any word, right? It could be knowledgeable, it could be anything. Even the prepositions are included here. And for us to contain 1 or more of these words, the probability is 4 divided by 80,000, because we have 4 chances to get one of the words. So this becomes 4. And 4 divided by 80,000 is 1 in 20,000. This is approximately 0.005% chance. 0.005% chance. But you just need to know it's 1 in 20,000 chance of you finding exactly what you're looking for. Now, we calculate the probability of this appearing in any given verse. So, for example, the first verse we just read, right? It contains 4 words, meaning there's 4 possible slots of a word selection. 1, 2, 3, 4. Any of the 80,000 words can go in here. Any of the 80,000 words can go here, here, and here. So to do this calculation, to simplify the calculation, we need an average understanding of what's the average slots in the Quran. For example, verse 74, 31, this is exactly the verse after, where God says, alayha tis'at ashara, over it is 19, contains 57 words. This is 19 times 3, just out of curiosity. Now, obviously, to average it, what we do is just we go through 6,346 verses. We count every single word count. The first verse is 4 words. The 31st verse of Surah 74 is 57 words. We add them all up and we divide by 6,346. The answer we get is 12, approximately. So it means for any given verse at random, I can pick a random verse in the Quran, it's very likely that it's going to have 12 words. Before I go on, can I just check that everybody is still on board?
Yeah, I wanted to just ask you if you can. I've got step one down. I don't know about other people, so I've understood step one perfectly. All right.
Mhm.
When we came to step two, you're asking about you're saying to calculate the probability for a typical verse, and this is what you've done on the right side, right? So you gave an example of uh, the what exactly with 57 words? Sorry, you brought 7431, and it has 57 words. Am I correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we're just using that as an example to do a calculation.
So the only reason I bought 7431 is to showcase the likelihood of how many words per verse, right? If I ask you what's the average number of words per verse in the Quran, what would that answer be?
You would take the ayahs, and you would take the whole words of the whole Quran and divide it by how many ayahs there are.
Correct. That answer is 12. So I've already done this calculation. You'll have to do your own homework to validate that, right?
No, that's fine. Yeah.
So all this is saying is that for any random verse, on average, there's about 12 words that go into it, right? Obviously, the first verse we looked at had 4, so it's less than average. And the verse I highlighted, 7431, had 57. It's significantly more than average. But given the nature of the Quran, where some verses are very short, some verses are very long, when you add them all up and you average them all out, it's about 12 words. For any given verse, it's about 12 words that go into the verse, right? Okay, so now then what we need to do is calculate the probability of any verse having one or more of these words. And this is using the calculation of the probability here. So for any probability, for a given probability of a specific verse having one of these words, is the chance of every possibility, this is 1, minus by the chance of one of the words appearing, or one of the verses appearing 12 times. Because you have 12 chances. It's kind of like rolling a dice. And you can roll the dice 12 times. You can roll it here, you can roll it here. And every single time you have 1 in 20,000 chance of getting it right. Or getting one of the 4 words. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. So far, so good?
Yeah, I've got that so far. Yeah, 100%, 100%. As is everyone else good?
Yeah, feel free
Speak if you guys are not good.
yeah, feel free to ask the questions if, it doesn't quite gel. I'm going to take that as a continuation, God willing. So, given this probability, I can explain in more basic terms why it's multiplied that many times. But if everyone's comfortable with that, I don't have to explain it more. But ultimately, it's the probability of the competing words going in here and in here and in here and in here and in here. And the odds is roughly 0.06%, which intuitively makes sense, right? If I have 80,000 words, imagine I have 80,000 cards, right? And I throw one of these cards at random to 12 little slots. What's the chance that 4 of these magical cards, 4 of these specific cards that I want, Bismillah Rahman Rahim, appear in one of the verses? And the chance is 0.06%. Very, very small chance. So that's just the chance of one verse having, the repetition. The next part of this is the binomial distribution. Now we get a little bit heavier on the math side, because what we've done is we've only calculated the probability of one of the verses containing one or more of the words. But when you're dealing with 6,346 verses, you have various different permutations of exactly 1919 verses containing those words. And this is where binomial distribution comes in. So with binomial distribution, the whole spiel is about looking at every single possible outcome, and then from that possibility, taking how many variations of that is exactly matching what you want. And they call this the binomial coefficient here, right? And the way you say this is 6346, choose 1919. Meaning out of 6,346, you're wanting exactly 1919 verses, right? And so the calculation is using factorial. The way you calculate this is 6346 factorial, which is a very big number, 1919 times the balance. So 6346 minus 1919 is 4427. And so if you multiply this, you get the coefficient. Now, all the coefficient is telling you is the number of ways that 1919 could be selected. Now, I'm going to give a basic example of binomial distribution. Let's say you flip a coin, right? You flip a coin, it's either heads or tails. You flip a coin twice. Now, in binomial distribution, there's 4 possible outcomes. You can have heads, heads. You can have heads, tails. You can have tails, heads. And finally, you can have tails, tails. Now, these are the only possibilities. Now, let's say I wanted exactly one head. Doesn't matter which side, as long as only one head appears, right? These are the only 2 configurations where heads appears once. Here it's appeared twice. Here it's appeared 0 times, right? So if we know the probability of each of these instances is 1/2, right? As soon as you flick a coin, there's 50% chance it's going to be heads or tails. You flick another coin, 50% chance to be heads or tails. So the probability which we calculated earlier, this 0.06% chance, is just this single line, right? So it's 1 divided by 2, 1 divided by 2, which means 1/4. And when you add up every single instance, you get 1. So this is 1/4. This is 1/4. This is 1/4. This is 1/4. And the sum of these is 1. Because it's a certainty that one of these is the outcome, unless you throw the heads and it lands on its side. But this is not what we're talking about. So given that, the binomial distribution adds all the possibilities that exactly the number you're looking for appears. I only want 1. So there's 2 instances where 1 appears, where one it's tails then heads, and the other one is when it's heads then tails. So given that the probability is 25%, the chance of me getting just heads is actually 50%, right? Because it's the sum of these 2. So if I throw heads and heads, it's not what I want. Heads or tails is what I want. Tails or heads is what I want. Tails or tails is not what I want. So the sum of all the possibilities is 50%. This is a no-go, and this is a no-go. So that's what this binomial coefficient is. This binomial coefficient is saying out of all the possible, imagine the 1 is the probability that we're looking for something specific, right? For every single verse that I go to, verse 1:1, verse 1:2, I don't know why it's going out like that, all the way to the very end, What I'm saying is, out of all the possible configurations, I want exactly 19 verses, however they appear through the verses. It could come from 1, 1. It could come from, I'm going to clear this screen because it's getting messy here. It could come from 1, 1. It could come from the very last verse, 6, 3, 4, 6. But ultimately, when you look at it, if it comes from not 1, 1, but 1, 2, and then 6, 3, 4, 5, I'm still getting the same count, right? So there's many permutation in all the possible verses where exactly 1919 appears. That is not 1919. Just fix that. 1919 appears. And the answer, quite simply, is this. 10 to the 1897. That is a mega number. You have no idea how mega that number is. To give an example, the number of atoms in the universe is 10 to the 80. Every cell in your body has about 7 times 10 to the 27. That's the number of particles in your body right now. Every thought you're thinking about, every cell firing neurons in your brain, every photon that's entering your light, your eyes, whatever, only 10 to the 7. And then every atom in the entire universe is 10 to the 80. This number is significantly larger. Okay. I know that's a bit heavy, but go on.
Yeah. So are we saying here that there's because obviously we have 6,346. Just correct me if I'm wrong here. I've got this wrong. 6,346 verses, right? There's basically, to put it in maybe a layman's terms, 1919 different permutations or ways to fit into 6,346. So basically 6,346 different ways to fit 1919 into the Quran to try and get that number.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have many different versions
Yes.
where it adds up to 19. Imagine I'm not looking for 19. Imagine all I'm looking for is 2, right? Out of 6,346 verses, how many ways can I have exactly 2, right? If it appears in verse 1, 1, like we said here, that's one way, and the final verse. Or it appears in 1, 2, and then the second final verse. This is another way. Or it appears in the third verse and the third last verse. That's another way. Or if it appears in the second verse and the final verse, right? This combination, that's another way. Or it appears in the first verse and the second last verse. That's another way. We're just counting all the possible ways that exactly that number you're looking for appears in the Quran. 2 in this instance. Now, when you go for 1919, you just have to accept that this is the formula, which is a factorial. Factorial means if I say 4 factorial, it's the same as 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. That's 24. When you increase this, you add 5 at the front. 5 times all of this, 6 times all of this, 7 times all of this, until you get to one of these numbers. And then once you've done 6346 factorial, you have to divide by the multiplication of 1919 factorial and 4427 factorial. I'll skip this bit because it's rather heavy, I guess. I don't want to take too long in this presentation, just dwelling on this specific portion.
No, it's all good. I think I get the idea of it.
Yeah.
I think I get the idea of it. Yeah.
But you're right.
Okay.
It's the ways you can get 1919, and it's many ways.
Yeah, because there'll be so many different ways to get 1919 into those 6,246 verses. There's so many different ways to get it in.
Correct.
And the numbers, it's astronomical. It's big, right? It's really big.
Yes, it's huge. Precisely right.
Yeah. Okay.
Now that we have that, we have the complete picture, right? So to calculate the final probability, we need the probability of exactly, this is the probability that we want, which is exactly 1919, right? And so in this instance, we add the coefficient of the binomial distribution, which is, we did earlier, that big number. And then we multiply by the probability of exactly 19 and the probability of not 1919 verses, right? For it to be 1919 verses has one or more of these words, the other 4,427 must not have those words, because if they did, it would be 1920, right? So we had the first calculation. This one is what they call the binomial coefficient, 10 to the 1897. And then we had the other calculation, that 0.06%, you can see it here, right? To the power of 1919 now, because that's the amount of verses that we want to have one of those words. If you remember when we did this calculation, out of these slots, the probability of any given verse having one or more of these words is 0.06%. So if we're going to the next portion, what we're saying here is that now has to happen 1919 times. 1919 verses must have one or more of those verses, one or more of those words. And this is the improbability. So we've got those. And finally, after we've reached 1919 verses containing one or more of those words, the final one is that the balance of the verses must not contain any of those four words, which is this number, 0.07. And then when you multiply all of them out, the coefficient multiplied by the probability of exactly 1919 verse containing it, multiplied by other verses not containing it, you get this number. This is the probability of exactly 1919 verses contains one or of the Bismillah. Right, so that's the probability. This is the final calculation. This is an estimate because I rounded up to 80,000. If you tried different numbers, the number is still ginormous. It doesn't matter what you try, the number is beyond astronomical. To put this into perspective, this is the same as 1, 0, followed by 4, 4, 2, 7 zeros. You see that, right? And now we're going to try to just understand the scale of this improbability. So this number, like I said earlier, is incomprehensibly small. The atoms in the universe is 10 to the 80. Now, if you were to randomly select a specific atom, right, one atom in the entire universe, this atom could be in the Andromeda galaxy, it could be the edge of the universe, it could be in your back garden, it doesn't matter. But you just want one single atom out of all the possible atoms in the entire universe, right? You would have to do this 55 times in a row to be less likely than this pattern appearing by chance. Meaning, let's say I mark a single atom in the universe, I color-coded it red, and then every single atom in the entire universe is blue, right? We throw it into a massive pot, we twirl it around, and then you draw an atom out. The chance of you getting the red atom is astronomically small. This has never happened in the balance of human history. This will never happen in the balance of human history. But let's say you're lucky enough, quote unquote lucky, and you got this specific atom, this red one. If you continue 55 times in succession, you chuck all the balls back in a huge blender, you twirl all the numbers around so it's fairly distributed. You do it again. Your hand is now reaching into the pot a second time to get exactly that red ball again, right? if you were to win this red ball, if you were to find this red ball 55 times in succession, that probability is still less than the probability of 1919 verses having one or more of these words. Less than, because it's 10 to the minus 4400. What we just uncovered was 10 to the minus 4427. Right, so it's extremely improbable. And to give more perspective on this, this is like if you bought a lottery ticket, every second since the Big Bang, which is this many seconds, which is this many tickets, you'd need to win the lottery 632 times in a row. That's a lot of tickets. And even buying that many tickets, you'd have to win 632 times in a row. No one in human history has ever won, I think, more than 2 or 3 times lottery, right? This is human lottery against 1 million people, against 10 million people, against 100 million odds. These odds are astronomically large. So that's the same as flipping a coin and getting heads 14,720 times in a row. It just isn't happening, not by chance, not unless both sides of the coin is heads, right? Not unless the heads is heavier, and so it's uneven distribution, meaning that it was by chance. The game is rigged. So this proves that this is objective and it's verifiable. Right? Anyone with access to the internet can verify this. You can go to QuranCorpus.com, and God willing, we'll go through some of the Excel file with not all of the raw data, but some of the raw data. You can validate this yourself. God willing, I can even share the Python script, maybe. But you don't really need Python script. You just need all the verses, and you check if they do appear in those verses, and that confirms your calculation, I guess. Math is a universal language, right? So this isn't an interpretation. This isn't a tradition. This isn't some random analysis of the equation, right? This is, for example, they have this idea that there's a 7 repetitive pattern in the Bible, right? 1, 7 is less improbable. And 2, if you keep looking for the 7th word or the 8th word or the 9th word in some sequence, you're going to extricate some meaning. This isn't that. The verses ended exactly in 1919. Whoever did this, whatever being did this deliberately. And this happened 1400 years ago, before there were computers. Meaning the author had to keep track of 80,000 words and decided every time a word is used, while simultaneously making the sentence make sense, that exactly 1919 verses would contain one or more of these words. And it gets more complex, obviously, because this isn't just the layer. This is one of the patterns that we see. So you don't need interpretation. This is all very straightforward. As you've seen, this is through modern technology. We now have access to AI and a bunch of sophisticated stuff. But if you understood the math, you can reverse engineer and access this calculation yourself. No human effort or AI effort could ever do this. This is impossible. You could grab all the compute on the planet, ChatGPT 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Claude, Opus, Sonnet, doesn't matter. You chuck all of them into the sink, and we use all the compute of the entire world all at once. They couldn't reproduce this, right? Because it's intricately connected, the mathematical connection, as well as delivering meaning, right? We read this book as if it's just natural, right? It's giving you guidance. But within it is an embedded mathematical structure. This is God's language of the universe. So obviously this is done by the Creator. And so this is just one of the elements of the Quran. There's 6,346 verses we spoke about. That's 19 times 334. There's 114 chapters. That's 19 times 6. The word Allah, this is the proper noun, is used in 2,698 times, 19 times 142. That's excluding the false verses in Surah Bara'ah, 9, 128, 129. where it's repeated. This count becomes 2699. We'll see that in the Excel file, God willing, if we get there. The word Rahman appears 57 times as the nominal, 19 times 3. Rahim, 114 times, 19 times 6. And all the Quranic initial patterns are divisible by 19. If you wanted to check that, you can use our bot. You can do initials about, or you can read Rashad's book on the Computer Speaks. He explains this, right? Alif Lam Mim, one of the initials, repeats in chapter 2, Surah Baqarah, 9899, I think. 9899. This is a multiple of 19. Surah Yasin. Don't know if that's the best representation in English. Surah Yasin has 285 Ya and Sin, 19 times 15. And all of the patterns, Ha, Mim, Ain, Sin, Qaf, so on and so forth, have these patterns. And out of interest, in the first slide, when we saw Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim, every single one of those letters except the Ba, right, with or in the name of God, they're called the light letters, is contained in the huruf muqatta'at. You have Alif Lam Mim, Alif Lam, Ro is there, Lam is there, Mim is there, Alif is there, right? Ha is there, Mim is there. So you can see that every single letter in the Bismillah appears in the disjointed letters. And that, again, isn't by chance. So this is a fulfillment of the Quranic prophecy. God is saying, we will show them our proofs in the horizons and within themselves until they realize that this is the truth. So this mathematical computer couldn't have been discovered or done outside of the computer age. You would have to manually count 77,000 words, which would take years. And then you have the human error, right? Someone could mistakenly add a specific word, forget the specific word, transcribe the wrong word, write down the wrong word in the manuscripts. And then you've got the analysis to even find the pattern, right? 1400 years this was hidden, specifically 1406 in the lunar year, right? Which is exactly the pattern when it was discovered in 1974. This was discovered by Rashad in 1974. And if you times 19 times 74, we get 1406. Hoi, hold on, my pen is wilding a bit. Let me try that. You get 1406. And this is exactly the number of lunar years from when the Quran was revealed. That's wrong, not 3, it's 2, till now. From here to the lunar year of when this was found is exactly 1406 lunar years. Now that's crazy. And then in chapter 74, the only verse that mentions code 19 is in verse 30, right? 74, 30. It says, Alayha tis'ata shara. Who is that? Someone, is that you, Brother Aditya? Someone's unmuted. Over it is 19. Right, so you can see coincidence after coincidence, right? And God is clearly saying this itself was prophesied, that the proofs will be shown in the horizons, external world and the technology, when the time was right. So, no, the text has this, right? We spoke about the code 7 in the Bible. This is on arbitrary skip sequence, works on any text. There's some math people that have done some analysis on Shakespeare. There's no mathematical framework there. Hindu Vedas, they say the same things. None of them have this, right? None of them have the improbability of precisely the attunement of exactly appearing in 19 times, while having the scripture mention that number, while having a criteria of what this number does, right? There's 5 criteria in 7431. I won't go through them. So this is unique, right? This is unique because it's across the entire text. I haven't changed anything here. I've just gone through each of the verses. Every time the words appear, I add them. If none of them appear, I don't add them. This is multi-layered and interlocking, and it makes sense as you're reading the Quran while this mathematical magic is working in the background, or mathematical miracle, I suppose. In the background, you're still getting the wisdom from the Quran. Praise God. So God obviously gave a challenge, right, to this. If you have any doubt, produce one surah like this. It's not just the literary challenge. The challenge is mathematical, and it's impossible, given what we've just uncovered. The math that I presented to you is advanced for most people today. Right? If you graduated, you were math students, I don't know, engineering, physics, whatever, yeah, maybe this is something that registers to you. But most people will not have this as a core foundation of their understanding. So for them to see this, they have to have deep-seated knowledge in that specific domain. To replicate this, right, you have to create some kind of book that has X amount of verses, 6,000 something verses. In it, that book has to have repeated 19 patterns, right? In it, it has to have some pattern repeating in 1919 times. And it has to make sense. It has to be literally excellent. If you read the Quran, whether in the Arabic or the English, is extremely poignant and powerful. And it uses a lot of powerful alliteration and all these things. It's not a book of poetry, but it stands on its own. And it has to be relevant. This is 1400 years ago. We use the Quran today to understand it. And it's transformative. And no one ever will, right? This is, the author is God. You can't recreate what God is doing. For God, this is easy. So we've established that, right? This is the improbability of 1919 verses. Then you have the 114 chapters. That in itself is a small improbability. 6346 verses, which is a multiple of 19. Another small improbability. The word frequency being multiple of 19. This is the Ism, Ilah, Rahman, Rahim, is another improbability in its own right. The Quranic initial system, that's another improbability. When you combine all of these numbers, it is mega. I mean, it was mega before. This is enough to dwarf every single thing we looked at. But it just tells you the sum of the sequence of events, every interlocking compound probability, makes this an impossibility. This is only possible through the authorship of the Almighty God. And we've talked about the, atoms. If you counted the Planck time, this is a very, very small time length since the Big Bang. You could play this many chess games, right? It's simply impossible by chance. This is by design. That's the only conclusion. I might just run through all this because ultimately the message has been delivered, right? So this isn't circular reasoning. Some people say it's circular reasoning because you're using the thing to prove the thing. No, this breaks that.
Allahu Akbar, man.
Praise God. This is outside of anything you can possibly ever imagine. Even if you go through something called Gödel's theorem of incompleteness, that's another layer that I don't want to dive into. But this might stand to be the single proven thing in existence that doesn't just require faith; it's just absolute. And
Just point straight to God, man. Just point straight to God.
yeah, God gives you the answers, right? There's no doubt that this is from God. If you've gone through this, you've gone through the math, and you've done the legwork yourself, you'll see you don't need to find all the multiples of the letters or exactly perfect patterns, whatever. No. Just validate this one code. Just validate this one bit. If you're able to validate this one bit, you have grasped the single source of truth that will last your lifetime, which is that this scripture is infallible and a beacon for the righteous. And the scripture is from the Almighty, right? God is saying, why do they not study the Quran carefully? 482. That in itself is another miracle, not to do with code 19, to do with contradiction and the appearance of contradiction. Maybe I'll save that for another time. So this is the challenge, right? You don't double count the verses. Your total will be 1919 verses. God willing, I'll provide all the reference at the end here. But this is more rewarding if you do it yourself, God willing, right? You'll face some challenges to find the differences between proper nouns and all these other things, but the crux of it is there for you. So we can't explain this by chance. This cannot be replicated by a human. Been there for 1400 years. It was there before every one of our grandfathers was ever born. That's how far back it was. This is a Quranic prophecy. This is God's prophecy that it would be clarified by the clarifying messenger, and this is what he brought. He didn't know about this, by the way. Rashad didn't know about this 1919 verse. Right, even though he presented the proof, he knew the pattern exists because of divine revelation and God's guidance. This came later. So it's not blind faith.
This was discovered by who? Was there any particular person that discovered this code? I mean, this variation of 19?
I don't know who it is. I don't know who it is.
Oh, okay, fine.
If
No problem.
If someone's watching this video and they have the name to whomever carried this, feel free, let us know. Finally, the 19th slide, right? You can read the Quran for yourself to verify, right? Rashad Khalifa explains this. This is the word frequency probability calculation we did earlier, 10 to the minus 12 in the book called The Computer Speaks. This is in our server. You can go through that. And there's another mathematical calculation there as well. This is, if you want to verify, this isn't my website or anything like this. This is Quran.com. This is a traditional Sunni website, corpusquran.com as well. This is for the word by word analysis. And God says in the Quran, 1736, we're giving you the eyesight, the hearing, and the brain, and you should use it, right? Meaning that you're responsible for these qualities, these traits. God gives you the brain. So verify this for yourself. I've just given you an insight to it, but ultimately it's your own prerogative to go through it to find that the numbers tally. So that concludes the